Hey guys, it's Red and Blue, and today there's honestly not a whole lot of things to talk about. The PSG squad is back in Paris, back to preparing towards the next game, which is going to be our French Cup game against Paris FC on Monday. But today, the thing that struck me the most, and I wanted to jump on the mic and actually debrief a little bit, is something I've seen on Twitter and I've seen in French media. There seems to be a lot of chatter and honestly slightly misinformed conversation around the Dembele contract extension negotiations. And it all started, if I'm honest, it all started from a report from RMC, so French radio journalist, who's very, very knowledgeable about Mercato and about PSG. And essentially what he said is that contract negotiations are ongoing. PSG is trying to accelerate to find solutions for both Dembele and Barcola, but that right now, essentially negotiations are in progress and nothing has been finalized. That's the initial report that came out. From there on, a second French journalist, also well known in the football world, also from a slightly less reputable media, Santi Aouna of Foot Mercato, which is, if you follow Spanish media, it's the French equivalent of El Fichajes. So very prominent, very well known, but not necessarily always reliable. Came out and on this report said, a breakdown in negotiations between PSG and Dembele. PSG offered a great offer, and the player turned it down. And that's when it went to English media, became English media tweeting and saying, PSG offered Dembele 30 million euro a year, and Dembele turns it down because he wants 2 times as much. And so I saw that last tweet, and honestly, it looked so wrong to me. I kind of pulled and went back to the French side and tried to uncover what everyone was saying and what was the reality of it. And I'm not going to say I'm shocked because I know how it works and I've seen it before and so on. But it's just every time, I find it so ridiculous how people just go to shortcuts in hopes of generating clicks, generating attention, generating headlines, and ultimately making PSG look like a club that doesn't know what it's doing and that's just making completely ridiculous decisions. So let's go back to it. The status and what we know is that PSG, after last season, after Dembele won his Ballon d'Or, they know that they need to if they want to keep the player long term, they need to propose something different for him. Even if he's very well paid right now, he's the best paid player in the PSG squad. He's paid about 12 million euro a year. It's still far out from top players around the world, and even from what PSG used to play in the era of the Mbappés, Messi, and Neymar. To give you a sense, one of the recent news that caught my eyes is that Upamecano is likely going to stay in Bayern Munich because Bayern Munich is giving him a contract extension with a salary of 20 million a year. So Dembele being on 12 right now, and the best paid player in PSG. So Bayern Munich is going to give Upamecano 20. And at 20 million a year, both PSG and Real Madrid said, no, we're not going to pay him that much. So it's fine. You can keep him essentially. So obviously, it means that a player like Dembele, who's a Ballon d'Or winner, a Champions League winner, a World Cup winner, who's the leader of PSG's offensive line, if not the whole squad, is very far off the pace. And so there's a very legitimate and very normal conversation that started happening around the time of the Ballon d'Or, a little bit before, but then keeps happening and is ongoing. And obviously those things take some time. And so negotiations are ongoing and it's completely normal and it's fine. So the player didn't refuse the offer. There's negotiations going on. So if you negotiate, sometimes you say no, but it doesn't mean the conversation stops. It's just the process, so it's fine. Then I go on to the numbers, because I think like it's so easy when you're doing tweets and you're doing short like headlines and so on, to throw big numbers without context in the hope of grabbing people's attention. And honestly, like, I'm sorry, like I get conflicted basically like almost on a daily basis doing this YouTube channel, because I know I could come to you and make up some like crazy transfer rumors about PSG, with no basis in reality, and try to sell you on it. And I'd probably have like 5 times more subscribers than I do. But yeah, like this is the way of the internet. That's not how I see things. But yeah, so 30 million a year. Let's talk about that for a second. 30 million euro a year. What does it mean? Because I honestly, like, I look at the number and like, yeah, sure, it's believable. I mean, PSG used to pay Mbappe like nearly 100 million a year. So if we want to pay Dembele tomorrow 30 million a year, we absolutely can. It's absolutely like not out of whack of world football. And so yeah, like there's no drama about it. The things that people are missing, and the ones that I blame are the journalists, is that 30 million doesn't mean anything if you're like just showing it like this. Is it 30 million before or after tax? Because in France, if it's typically like when in world football, we tend to talk about salaries after tax. Because like clubs pay for the taxes of their players, and in France, like, and I think in most countries, you pay like payroll tax that the employer has to pay anyway. And so in that context, some of the tax are borne by the employer anyway. And so like we look at the bottom line, we look at what actually goes in the pocket of the player. And so like we look at after tax. Is it 30 million after tax? I like, it's not impossible. I find it a bit hard to believe given like the policy of PSG. But could like, if like tomorrow I hear in the media PSG and Dembele agree and sign a new contract and is going to be paid like 30 million a year, I'd say like it's a bit expensive, but it's not completely out of whack. Now you're telling me that 30 million is our first offer and that the player is turning it down because he wants twice as much. That I find a little bit hard to believe, because like it's essentially saying that Dembele wants to triple his salary. And from what we've heard coming out of Dembele and coming out of his entourage and so on, the player wants more money and wants like a new contract that recognizes his status. But he also like doesn't sound completely unrealistic and doesn't sound completely crazy. So like that number is really like very strange to me. And so then going back to the tax question, because like that's where like it's the French specificity as well, is that 30 million, if it's pre-tax, it actually means that what's going in the pocket of the player is probably around 15 million euros, because half of the salary is going to go into taxes, probably like somewhere around 45% in reality. Payroll tax plus like income tax and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, like, journalists are throwing a 30 million number, but the reality is that the offer is actually 16 million euro offer. And so yeah, like if we're like saying to the player, you're at 12 million right now and we're going to move you to 16, I would say that's actually very, very reasonable of PSG, and like almost like, a cheap offer. And, if you're starting negotiation, of course, like PSG is going to put an offer that's going to be under. The player is going to come back with an offer that's going to be over, and they're going to meet somewhere in the middle. That's the way negotiation works. So 30 million, like, it doesn't feel to me like it's a real number. And so I'd like to know what goes into it. And the second part of it as well is that the PSG new salary and contract policy is that there is a part of the salary which is flat and fixed and so on, but there's a big part of it, typically like almost half of the salary is actually tied to performances. And so it's based on how many games does the player play, how does he perform, does he score goals, does he have assists, does he like and so on. Does he have awards, and so on and so forth. And so, like for a player like Dembele, who's got an injury track record, and who's obviously did extremely well last season, but he's not always been the most consistent of goal scorer and achievement player. So for him, I want to know how much of this supposed 30 million salary is fixed and how much is going on in bonuses. Because if you're giving him 30 million euro, let's go back to the 30 million euro. We're giving him 30 million euro post taxes straight into his pocket. Is it 25 million fixed and 5 million in bonus, or is it 10 million fixed and 20 million in bonuses? Because so far, what has he played this season? He's played generously, maybe 1/3, 1/4 of games. So if you're paying 1/4 of that extra 20 million, all of a sudden it's not a 30 million offer, it's a 15 million offer again, and so that changes everything. So yeah, it's honestly it's the way it works. I understand, but it's so easy to throw out a big number to make headlines and make clicks. But the reality is very much more complex than this. And ultimately, a player like Dembele, like I said, deserves a contract extension with a higher salary. I'm a big believer personally that he's going to come back to his top level. Maybe not exactly where he was last season, but we've seen it in the last 2 games. He scored 2 goals. And I think he's still one of the most unpredictable player and the hardest one to defend. He's a superstar. Simply put, he's a superstar and a top player, and I want him in PSG, and I want him leading our attack. So there's no drama there. Negotiations are ongoing. We'll see where they lead and whether we can find a deal on it. And I think the wider conversation as well, and I think, that's the part that's missing out of those reports, and I think that's the part that's really interesting, is that the conversation around Dembele and the wider conversations around contract extension is really starting to give us a sense of what our line of attack is going to look like in the long term. Because Dembele in himself, extend him, don't extend him, you can make an argument depending on whether you like the player or not, and how you see PSG doing. Personally, I say extend him, but the real question is, how does he fit, and what is his role, and how do we organize him? Because last season he was our false 9. This season he actually spent a fair chunk of time playing on the right wing again. And so, there's a legitimate conversations around, do we need a new number 9? Is he do we have a shortage of player on the right side? And so we need Dembele to come back to that spot. There's also a question mark around Barcola's contract extension and whether he's going to stay in PSG long term. Personally, I think there's a big question mark around Désiré Doué. Not so much in terms of whether he stays in Paris or not. He stays in Paris for now. But I think it's becoming very clear game after game that his best position of Désiré Doué is actually on the left side of attack. And so if he's on the left side of attack, one, you don't really need Barcola anymore because you've got Doué and Kvara. And two, you've got a gap on the right side. And right now, in the squad of PSG, especially with Kangin being injured these days, the best guy to take over that spot is Dembele. And so if I place myself thinking of next season, because it looks like from what we're hearing, Luis Campos and Luis Enrique, they're really thinking ahead to next season and what our squad might look like next season. Yes, you negotiate with Dembele to extend him, but do you give him a 30 million a year offer if you're gonna have to bring in a new number 9 because you're moving him back on the right flank? Do you give him a 30 million euro offer if you move him back on the right flank and you know that statistically speaking it's going to be harder for him to be as impactful and score as many goals from the right flank than it is from number 9? Do you give him a 30 million offer if you know that you need to pay a contract extension for Barcola at the same time? Those conversations don't happen in isolation, and so I think it's it's really important to consider the full field of the conversation. And I think in that context, like that number in isolation is great, once again, to get some clicks and get some headlines. But it really doesn't tell me much, and it's really not something that we should. Well, I hate to say after doing a 15-minute video, but it's not something we should spend a lot of time and energy on. It's ridiculous as it sounds. So, for now, and I think it's always the case with PSG fans, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's keep a cool head. Let's see where that very normal and legitimate conversation goes. And yeah, we'll see, if there's no... I think if there's no agreement for contract extension by the end of the season, like, the conversation will bubble up anyway, and we'll hear more, and we'll see whether the player has a market somewhere else, whether other clubs are prepared to pay more than what he gets in PSG. Now our policy is that we're not going to hold people against their wish, and if Dembele at the end of the season cannot find a deal with PSG, thinks he's not getting paid enough, thinks he can find a better deal elsewhere, and wants to do that, I'll be very, 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 very sad about it, because I really value the player and I love the guy. But yeah, this is a new PSG. We're reasonable with our finances. We're going to pay people what they're worth, and a Ballon d'Or is worth a lot of money. But we're not going to be silly about things anymore, and I think that's completely fine. We've got to trust that it's not necessarily the most expensive players that win the most trophy. And I think we've paid a lot of money to learn that lesson. And I think as fans, we need to remember it every day, especially in Mercato window. So, for now, let's keep cool. This is what I had for you guys on the Dembele contract dead end or not. We'll see what happened. I'm pretty optimistic, honestly, because I know the player really likes Paris. I think he really found a home there. I think he really achieved the pinnacle of his career right here under Luis Enrique. I think he was very, very, I think it went beyond his expectations, and he was able to be the guy that led PSG to its first Champions League, and to be the guy that won the Ballon d'Or. And so I'd be surprised if there wasn't a way to find an agreement. I'll give you more details on that as soon as there is an agreement and we have info. We'll see how much we end up racking up for him. But for now, this is what I had for you guys. As always, please drop a like on the video if you've made it this far. Let me know in the comments what you think of this, and how much stock you put into those Twitter rumors and contract renegotiation headlines. And how much would you be willing? I think that's a great question, actually. Let me know in the comment how much you would be willing to pay to keep Dembele in the club. Because yeah, I think the spectrum is very wide, because between people who think he's always going to be injured, and the last 6 months of last season were a blip, and people who think he's really found his groove, and he's a different player than what we've seen in the past. So let me know about this in the comment. Drop a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. And as always, ici c'est pareil.